The air didn't taste like the recycled bitterness of the sublevels anymore. It tasted like jasmine and damp earth, a sweetness so thick it felt like a physical weight on her tongue. Elena Vance tried to lift her rifle, but her fingers felt like melting wax. The roar of the cannons had been replaced by a low, humming vibration that bypassed her ears and settled straight into her marrow. Revolution is a heavy burden for such a small creature, a voice pulsed, not through the air, but through the very floor beneath her knees. Before the sweetness, there was only the cold. Elena had spent 3 years in the crawl spaces of New Apex, breathing the greasy air of the vents and dreaming of a sky she'd never actually seen. She was the firebrand of the Iron Pulse, the one who promised that humanity would never be anyone's garden ornament. They were the thorns in the side of the Sylvan Collective, or so they told themselves while huddling around battery-powered heaters in the dark. The mission was supposed to be a simple puncture. Hit the atmospheric processor, vent the oxygen, and prove that the benevolent overseers could still bleed sap. But the Sylvan didn't bleed. They grew. When the first flowering vine snaked through the reinforced steel of the bulkhead, it didn't snap like wood. It flexed like muscle. Then came Elder Moss Step. Elena had expected a monster, something jagged and terrifying. Instead, the arboreal primus was a towering presence of bioluminescent moss and deep shifting greens. The creature didn't attack. It simply existed in the space Elena needed to escape, its core glowing with a soft, rhythmic light that matched the frantic beat of her own heart. And the pheromone cloud was invisible, but its effect was absolute. It stripped away the jagged edges of her anger, leaving her skin feeling overly sensitive and her mind frustratingly calm. The last thing she remembered was a sensation of being lifted, not by hands but by 100 emerald coils that felt as soft as silk and as unyielding as gravity. She woke up in a world without corners. The verdant reach was a sprawling orbital terrarium, where the light was always golden and the temperature was always a perfect mocking 72 degrees. Her tactical gear was gone. In its place was a shift of pale fabric that felt like a second skin. Her boots, worn thin from years of running, had been replaced by the bare contact of her soles against a floor made of living, warmed moss. Elena paced the perimeter of the suite. The glass was thick, looking out over a forest that stretched toward an artificial horizon. She looked at her hands. They were clean for the first time in a decade. No grease under the nails, no scars from slipshod repairs. It felt wrong. It felt like a betrayal. Truth is, the quiet was more terrifying than the sirens ever were. The silence of the vines is louder than the roar of the cannons, and it was starting to drown her out. Ironically, the creature that had captured her didn't seem to care about her rage. Moss Step would enter the suite with the slow, deliberate grace of a growing tree, bringing trays of food that smelled like actual sun-ripened fruit. The alien never spoke with words, only that low-frequency hum that made Elena's chest ache with a longing she couldn't name. It was the velvet grip of a god who only wanted her to sleep, and every day, the urge to stop fighting felt a little less like a defeat and a little more like a relief. The crack started as a whisper and ended as a scream. Elena didn't use a bomb. She used the very luxury that was meant to pacify her. She had spent days studying the stress points where the reinforced glass met the carbon fiber structural ribs of the dome. A heavy, decorative crystalline basin served as her hammer. When the fracture finally spiderwebbed across the transparent sky, the sound was like a gunshot in a library. The pressure differential did the rest. Acre howled, a predatory sound that wanted to pull the lungs right out of her chest. Elena gripped the edge of a planting bed, her knuckles white, her eyes fixed on the black, star-pierced hole she had torn in her world. She waited for the end. She waited for the victory of the grave, a final middle finger to the beings who thought they could domesticate a wolf by giving it a softer bed. But the vacuum never reached her. Instead of the freezing bite of space, Elena felt a sudden, staggering heat. It turned out that Moss Step was faster than gravity. The arboreal primus didn't move toward the breach. She moved toward Elena. In fact, the alien didn't even try to fix the dome. She simply unspooled. The massive bioluminescent core vines, the very heart of the creature's consciousness, whipped through the air like emerald lightning. They wrapped around Elena, layering over her body in a thick, pulsing cocoon. Through the gaps in the living weave, Elena saw Moss Step's outer limbs, the beautiful, flowering branches that had brought her fruit and comfort, get sucked toward the breach. And the alien was using her own body as a biological plug. Elena heard the sickening sound of wood splintering and sap boiling in the vacuum. The vines holding her tightened, pressing her against the warm, rough bark of the creature's chest. The low-frequency hum wasn't a song anymore. It was a rhythmic, grinding vibration of agony. But it was also a shield. Elena tried to fight, to claw her way out of the embrace, but the heat was too much. It was the warmth of a sun she had never seen, the smell of burnt leaves and ancient earth. She felt the impact of debris hitting the creature's back. She felt the vibration of the emergency shutters finally slamming shut, sealing the breach and trapping them both in a sudden, ringing stillness. When the vines finally loosened, hours had passed. The suite was a wreck. Shattered glass lay like diamonds across the floor, and the once lush greenery was scorched and blackened. Moss Step was smaller now, her outer canopy gone, her bark scarred and oozing a thick, golden fluid. She was slumped against the wall, her bioluminescence dimming to a faint, exhausted ember. Elena stood in the center of the ruin, her hands shaking. She looked at the creature that had nearly died to keep her breathing. A golden cage is still a cage until you realize the door was never locked. Only the outside was cold. The realization didn't come with a flourish. It came with the weight of exhaustion and the stinging behind her eyes. Elena looked at the sapling identification collar sitting on the nearby table, untouched until now. It was a simple band of braided silver and green. So to wear it was to admit she was no longer a soldier. It was to admit that the iron pulse was a memory. Ironically, the choice didn't feel like a surrender. It felt like a rest. Elena picked up the collar. The metal was cool against her skin. She walked over to the weakened, regenerating trunk of Moss Step and sat down in the dirt at its base. She didn't say a word. She simply clicked the collar around her neck and leaned her head back against the alien's warmth. Far below, on the surface of New Apex, the last of the human resistance signals flickered on her discarded comms unit, then faded into static. Elena didn't reach for it. She just closed her eyes and listened to the slow, mending heartbeat of the forest. I can help you explore the aftermath of this new dynamic, or perhaps focus on a different story within the Sylvan Collective. Would you like me to detail Elena's first tending session with Moss Step?